Okay. We just want to let everyone know that we're recording this. Yeah, once again, my name is Sean Green. I'm chair of the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods. We welcome you to this event co-hosted between the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods and the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty. And we're going to start with a land recognition, a land acknowledgement. And I have the pleasure of introducing one of the staff members at the Northeast Coalition, Jessica Rojas, who's executive associate director of the coalition, and she's going to provide a land acknowledgement. Jessica?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time and for inviting me today. I just want to say that personally, it just brings me a lot of happiness to see our local faith providers and congregations coming together and working with our neighborhoods. This is amazing. Today, as we come together virtually in Portland and around the state for reflection, learning, and action, I would like us all to take a moment to acknowledge and honor the land that we are all on and its history. Our virtual forum is being centered on the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, many bands of the Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, the Malala, and many other tribes that have called this place home for generations, whether through traditional practices or through forced relocation. We'd like to acknowledge and honor the vibrant urban Native community of today with members of over 380 tribes from around the country who call Portland home. We pay respect and thank all the Indigenous people for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands since time immemorial. We give gratitude for their continued work, celebrate their rich histories, spiritualities, practices, and cultures that are tied to this land. In addition to that, I would like to personally extend an invitation to everybody who's listening to continue to learn about the current issues, the struggles, and calls to action that tribes and tribal members are making. We acknowledge their enduring perseverance and resilience across generations. This calls us to learn how to be better stewards of the land that we inhabit and in our community and for the future. And the last thing I'll just say is, it's an honor to be able to make this land acknowledgement, not only as my own father's side is indigenous to this continent and the areas of Southern California, but on my mother's side, I'm a descendant of Mormons who came here on the Oregon Trail. And that means I'm inviting you all from here on out, never be afraid to give a land acknowledgement. You may make mistakes and people may correct you, and that is okay. But today I'm calling us all to step into this work of embodying what it means to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And I've had a great pleasure getting to know Jessica and work with her at the Northeast Coalition. She's a great asset to our community. Well, we welcome you to this forum. We're really excited. This is a issue that the Northeast Coalition has been working on for a while, and we've been very supportive of our unhoused community and wanting to support alternative shelters and villages. It's been a pleasure getting to know the Interfaith Alliance as the Northeast Coalition representative to the Interfaith Alliance, and it brings us a lot of joy and to be able to work together and to be able to put on this forum and work towards helping our community. And with that, I want to introduce the co-chair of the Interfaith Alliance, Carol Turner.
Good morning. I join in the welcome that Evan gave. I'm sorry, that Sean gave. It's too early, sorry. We just want to acknowledge that some of you know a great deal about what we're talking about. Your lives have been immersed in it, your careers have been immersed in it, and some of you are joining for the first time and just because you're curious, and we want to welcome everyone. Some of you have lived in these villages and know these issues intimately, and we want to welcome everyone. Just to give you a little background, the Alliance, Interfaith Alliance, has really focused on systemic issues over our 4 years of being a very loose collaboration. But as we began to view with our open eyes about what's happening on the streets, we felt like we had to ask ourselves a really key question is what strategies would effectively help the unsheltered, those who are visible or not visible or in the shadows. What strategies would effectively help our unsheltered in our community now, and at the same time really help the general public feel that something's happening. We know from surveys and interviews that general public are feeling pretty discouraged about and making any progress in this. So in our work, we've concluded that we need to seriously consider transitional options, such as alternative self-managed campsites, car camping sites, anything that's viable in the near future, in the now, that would increase the number of safe and decent places for people to sleep at night. Safe and decent places for people to sleep at night. So the goal today really is to begin the conversation, determining how we can increase those alternative shelters and village options. And really asking ourselves, how can we come together in an active working coalition to really offer everyone in Portland a safe and decent place to sleep? So I think candidly, the ultimate intent here is to see if we can create an active working coalition of individuals, organizations, businesses, other leaders, and government to help develop and then execute that plan. A modest goal. So just to say, we're really casting a wide net here. Anytime you use any language, it's always limiting. But we're really talking just generally about transitional approaches. And it includes a range of approaches. Harbor of Hope, what's happening with the Bybee Project, home share that's in the works, tent camps, car camping sites, tiny villages. I could go on. And so I really encourage you all to look at all the options that offer a transitional ability for people to stabilize and then move their lives on. At the same time, we just need to recognize, we all know this issue is so complex. You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't recognize it. And the need for multiple strategies have to occur. So therefore, recognizing those of you who've worked hard in government to work on this, especially related to affordable housing with support staffs, the nonprofits who are helping the vulnerable, the business coalitions, the foundations and all, and then the example, especially of the city, really expanding opportunities I think it was just last week, for opportunities for affordable housing projects with the leadership of the Levin Coalition. So broad, many people and many caring, compassionate people. At the same time, we see that we wanted to bring a level of urgency to this. And that's why we put together this forum in 2 weeks that has gathered almost 200 people, which is pretty amazing. There's definite fear of number of people who are houseless with the economic fallout from the virus, and especially hitting the communities of color with increasing disparities that we know exist in our community. There seems to be some energy and interest in coalition among this. I think the fact that we attracted so many people indicates that. And then we also are wondering, are there opportunities we should consider here with funding that does not take away from the long-term focus, but also looks at what can occur during this time. So we're a group of volunteers who's kind of put together this in a short time frame. We appreciate your patience as we go forward. All of you have been on Zoom calls where things have locked up and that sort of stuff, so we'll just ask for your patience on that. Just to quickly review the agenda that hopefully you were sent. The major goal is to determine as a beginning conversation how we can increase alternative shelters and village options now, and how can we come together as an active working coalition. And desired outcomes, really the subset of that is how can really today looking at increasing our own understanding and knowledge of what this is all about and what this is not about, and then beginning to hear from you all about what should we be considering, what are opportunities and challenges to increase these options, and then just thinking briefly kind of, okay, what might come next? So that's your overview. I'm going to turn it back to Sean to just give a little bit about some of the technical aspects to make sure we're all up to speed on that. And then he'll take it from there with our opening speakers. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. All right, I'm going to go over a couple of things. We have a lot of people on this call, so it's important that people stay muted. You stay muted at the bottom of your screen. If you put your cursor down, you can see on the far left, there's the mute button. So make sure you stay muted unless you're called on to talk. There's also the option to chat that you'll see. And if you click on that, that'll open a chat view. And that's something where people can post questions and comments. You're able to switch the view. Those of you who haven't used Zoom before, if you go up to the top right corner, you see that there's different view options. And we recommend speaker view versus gallery view, but it's up to you how you want to do it. You can test out different options and see what works best for you. Once again, we want to let everyone know that we're recording both the audio, the video, and the chats. And we'll be using those recordings to develop notes to share with everyone. We potentially might release the recording publicly as well. We understand that people have different comfort levels with technology, but we're offering a variety of ways for you to join the conversation. In the email that we included, or that we sent out, we included a general email address where you can send questions or comments. We also provided a link to a Google document where you're able to provide questions and comments and access some resources. I think with that, we're going to get into our program. So let me pull up program. To start us off, we're going to have Tim McCormick, who's an organizer at Village Collaborative, give an overview of the types of shelters that we're talking about for the purposes of this conversation. Tim?
Okay, can you hear me? All right. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Carol. Thank you to our hosts, Northeast Coalition and Interfaith, for hosting, and thank you for everyone coming. This is frankly way more people than we even hoped for when we blithely jumped in 2 weeks ago about doing this. By the way, there is a link to the presentation, which I'm going to speak on. I'm not going to share my screen, but I have a presentation I have in front of me. There's a link to that off the general event page. Same words, nicer pictures, basically. I have been asked to comment on what might we mean by alternative shelter and villages. And I just want to say that we have different views on this, and whether we realize it or not. And I know I have a certain view, and but I would say for me, I think we're out here because of a sense of urgency and to be open to various approaches. And so I'm inclined to say that what this is any way we might enable anyone who is most in need to have a safe, decent, and humane place to live sooner, faster, cheaper, or in some way better than we are doing now. So I hope that pins it down really well for everybody. But in case it doesn't, I'm going to focus specifically on some alternatives to conventional shelter and villages, broadly defined. But I'd note here that even when you say villages, there are many types of villages, and there are loads of projects out there with all kinds of angles on this. So I encourage not going too quickly to any notion of like a village model or something like that, because there are many. And why do we have all these things going on? Well, because people are different and they have diverse needs, preferences, and priorities across different people and different times of your life. And also what's easier or cheaper varies a lot across situations. What's cheaper to build, what zoning allows, what funding sources you have. So there's a need and a space for a lot of approaches, and it's good to have a toolbox that has many that you can apply to need. Now, why do I think that? Where do these thoughts come from? Well, basically for about the last 8 years, I was living in the Bay Area for 7 years, coming back here regularly where my elderly parents live, and also road tripping around the West. And basically I've been observing and sometimes experimentally experiencing every variety and kind of like alternate way of living on the West Coast. And it's kind of a big living laboratory for good or bad. The common denominators for villages as a concept, I would say, are number one, an orientation to low cost and more easily or self-built dwellings. Number two, an orientation towards resident self-determination and shared management. Now these fit together because it's much more likely that a low-income person or anybody can self-determine and manage their own housing situation if the housing costs less and is more easily built and changed. This applies to all of us. These, I think, are the real keys, not so much how permanent structures or sites are or what kind of structure. The Village Collaborative is something I want to mention. This is one of the hats I wear. It's a project I manage. It's a nationwide network to document and support these. It's an outgrowth of Square One Villages in Eugene, which my friend Andrew Heben started in 2014. And we're kind of like their extended network of projects. So we have 1,700 plus members and count in the United States about 40 operating villages and over 100 if you count former or in development. Clearly there are many aspirational villages, but that tells you something. It's good to be something people aspire to, right? So there is a ton of stuff going on out there, and few people have a very clear, up-to-date view of that. So what do I see? What do we see from years of kind of looking across and getting the news bubbling up out of this network? Well, at one end, you have things like emergency initiatives, and that could be things like Portland C3PO camps, which arose just a few months ago in response to COVID-19. So if you haven't seen these in person or in the media, there's 3 of them. They're on parking lots that were, vacant or available. 1 in Old Town, 2 in the Central East Side. And they're basically tents on platforms with porta potties and basic facilities. And they're sort of like officially, you might say, officially managed versions of informal camps. And there are informal camps right next to them. They look a bit alike. They're more orderly, spaced out, and so on. By the way, C3PO, in case you're wondering, stands for Creating Conscious Communities with People Outside. And it is continuing the Star Wars theme of Right to Dream Rest Area, also known as R2D2. So I just want to pause and say thank you, Portland, for keeping some humor in this, desperately needed, and welcome. Now, also in this immediate category, as Carol mentioned, are things like safe parking areas where you can go and stay in your vehicle or your RV, and these have been around, safe parking areas, for quite a while. Santa Barbara pioneered this, believe it or not, improbably. And pretty simple in a way. Portland does have ventures experiments in this, but not widespread. But we could do more of it. Where I live, there are multiple people living in RVs within 50 yards of the front door of my building, and so it's happening. We're talking about better managing and supporting things that are happening. We could also extend it by not only just providing space for people that have an RV or a vehicle, but we could give people trailers or vehicle-based things like tiny homes on wheels. And we could even make such sites permanent. And then essentially what you have is a trailer park, which has a bad name, but really isn't necessarily a bad idea. It's actually how much of this country's low-cost housing is provided. So there's an angle which is like, well, maybe we should think about how to reinvent the things that currently house low-income people. Take the good part, get rid of the bad part. Now, a second category is what you might call transitional communities or villages, and we have good examples of those in Portland. Kenton Women's Village, Sarah on our call was quite involved in that in an earlier iteration of it in Lentz. And Dignity Village, which is now globally famous, and Right to Dream 2. And the situation there is people will not tell, they'll be called temporary or transitional, but they may actually stay for a long time or indefinitely. They have operating agreement with the city and often typically with the neighborhood or community, and those get renewed, and it may be annually, maybe every 2 years. If things are going well and they're working, they might get renewed indefinitely. So is that permanent or transitional? I don't know. It's permanently transitional, right? I'm reminded, by the way, of, I just looked this up. There's a great quote by the economist George Steiner, and he said, a transitional period is a period between 2 transitional periods. So he was pointing out or making fun of how economists would use that term. And so that's this zone in the middle. And then I would say, finally, at the other end of the spectrum, we have what I would call permanent villages, because they are, like Emerald Village in Eugene is a trailblazer in this. That's an amazing place. 22 homes, Community Land Trust owns the land. The buildings are owned by limited equity co-op and residents both pay a low monthly payment and become part owners of the co-op. So essentially it means permanent, very low income affordability and shared ownership in it, which is a pretty amazing and rare thing to ever occur in low income housing. So this is all new, and most people don't even know that this is thingable, but actually further frontiers that we could look at that I'm especially interested in. One is that home sharing, as has been mentioned. You know, maybe this is kind of low-hanging fruit, that we have a lot of homes around that are, you know, empty nest, underutilized, and maybe we can sort of facilitate organizing them, running them cooperatively. And we could call it village in a house. Stretching the term, I know, but just for the sake of fitting it into our name here. Also interesting to me is, could we create small villages as what's called cluster housing, which is essentially when you take a site and you plan it with multiple small units. And that well-known idea, and it's about to become permitted statewide because of last year's statewide zoning reform. So I'm very intrigued about whether that could work. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting angle because there's hundreds of thousands of such residential sites. But I think overall innovation here, or progress, is not necessarily in how we might build or site a village or structures, but actually how we might build community-wide agreement to allow those structures and build a balance of approaches and what I would call a productive balance of interests, where people realize that the pieces of this puzzle do fit together, and we're better off if we find how they do. That includes a balance of near-term and long-term, because we need both. You know, you can't only do one. If you're on the street tonight, the only solution is a near-term one. The long-term is immaterial to you. Now, let's be honest, some people want no type of camp or village anywhere in town, or think this is diversionary, or it doesn't count as ending homelessness. And some people, on the other hand, might rather abolish capitalism and the state and have only villages, which, okay, I'm listening. And some people would like to have enough villages, but only manage ones in approved places and nowhere else, which you might call zoning or public space zoning. So, entree into some big controversies and issues, I'm going to wrap this up and pass the mic back. I think next up we have Jonny Fisher, or maybe Sean is taking the mic. Thank you all for.
Thank you very much, Tim. Before we move on to our next speaker, if people are comfortable sharing their last name, it will help me ensure that they get into the right breakout group. And the way that you update your name is, there's a couple different ways. Number one, you can go down to the bottom and click on the participants, and then find your name and click on more, and you can rename yourself. And that would help me out. If you're not comfortable sharing your last name, it would help me out if you could send me a private message with your last name. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to Jonny Fisher, who works for Do Good Multnomah, which is a houseless service provider. He is the program manager of the Veterans Village and also the development manager. And the Veterans Village is a village in Clackamas County. And with that, we'll have Jonny take over.
Hi, thank you, Sean, for the introduction. Jonny Fisher. Really, there's a lot of different models to be able to follow, as Tim was mentioning about different ideas for transitional housing and the importance of transitional housing, which is a key piece that is missing when we are transitioning people we work with from houselessness into permanent or permanent supportive housing. It allows each individual to be able to get their feet on the ground long enough to be able to work towards getting into permanent housing. And the way that looks like is, you know, we've worked with individuals where they were able to have just enough time to be able to save enough money and pay off debt. And that's all they needed to use it for, was just a couple months of time to be able to save. And so Veteran Village is modeled a lot after Hazelnut Grove, which we actually have one of their founders now at Veteran Village, and they're staying there. We're also looking at starting up in the next couple of weeks in more transitional housing using hotels. And the way that kind of shows from hotels versus village living is community. Some people work really, really well in a community. And Tim, this is really echoing what you said. Different people need different resources, and they have different requirements to be able to meet their basic needs. Village, like Veteran Village, allows everyone to have a strong community, work together, versus hotels. Maybe some folk we work with don't do well with larger groups of people, so they're able to have either 1 or 2 people per room to be able to help fit their needs and what they need to be able to search for what sort of mental health they might need. And thank you. I think it was Deborah that, or sorry, Donna that brought up St. John's Village. That's another village that we're going to be putting in hopefully soon. We're still working on a lot of details on that. And the main thing is transitional housing works. We're able to re-socialize people that might have gotten bad habits from being on the trail for too long, and work with them for a Veteran Village. It's a 2-year program. Not everyone needs to use the 2-year program, but we're able to get any sort of resources they need, whether it's job, whether it's SSI, SSDI, and we could work one-on-one. And it's key to be able to have that that support in there to be able to help as best we can. Versus Hazelnut Grove, which is ran, it's really self-sufficient. There's no staff members. It's the villagers there. They have their own council, their own leadership structure that we kind of based it on. We just added another a support aspect to it. And kind of the key lessons learned on that is if anyone has ever had unemployment, or I mean, I've been on unemployment, and you can only look for jobs so many hours out of the day, and it becomes draining. So always trying to provide new resources, things to do. We have a communal area where people can hang out, watch TV, gazebo where people could be outside. It's really important that we don't just focus on finding a place to put people. We need to be there to help and assist. And for roles of the government and where the government can help is, Veteran Village is county funded, and we're contracted to run that through the county. And with that, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved with anything governmental. And going back to the support, this allows us to be able to handle the bureaucracy versus someone that might not have a computer, might not even have a phone. We're able to help with that one-on-one, and help maneuver through the bureaucracy to be able to find housing for anyone we work with. And I mean, I can, monthly expenses, that is one thing that I am incredibly proud of for Veteran Village. Currently, right now, we've been able to stretch our budget as best we can. We were able to have 15 individuals, 15 vets at our village at any given time. And now we're stretching as far as we can without increasing our budget. So we're at 19 individuals staying there at a time. And that all costs $150,000 a year. So that's the budget for running our village. Really, all that goes towards is paying staff. A lot of expenses is always going to be staff and the support, but that's the needed piece. We do not have staff there 24/7 because there isn't a need. Every individual is able to go into their pod, lock their pod, and feel safe. And for a lot of the folk we help out, this is the first time in years they've actually been able to feel safe, which allows everyone to be able to work on themselves instead of worrying about not even the next week, not even the next day, but the next hours. They don't need to worry about getting kicked out of a bus stop anywhere they're at. So we have a shared building for showers and restrooms. It's the same building our staff office is in, and that is so there's 3 showers and 3 bowls and 3 sinks in one area for the men. Then we have a separate area that locks for female participants, and that's a shower, bowl, and sink. And we have a single kitchen. It's a fairly large kitchen. We have 8 fridges and 1 large freezer, 1 stove. It'd be nice to have multiple stoves, but a lot of that goes into a lot of zoning issues to be able to keep the cost down. And we have a lot of support from the community providing food and bringing in meals. But part of the key is, you know what, let's cook our own meals, let's do our own chores and take care of the village on our own. It's every week we have village meetings, and I make sure to tell the villagers that are staying at the village that it would not be able to run without the villagers. The villagers run the village themselves. We're just here to help remove barriers and get any supportive services they need. Let's see.
Great, Johnny, I think we could take some questions after the 3 speakers talk.
All right, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You're perfect. I just want to keep us on schedule here.
I'll make sure to throw my email out there for any follow-up questions.
Great, thanks again, Johnny. And we will have some time after the 3 speakers for questions. Next up, we have Raven Drake. She's the medical coordinator for the 3 C3PO camps that Tim mentioned earlier. And she's a former vendor with Street Roots. And with that, I'll turn it over to Raven.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm the medical coordinator for the C3PO camps, and I've been there since the beginning and helped build it. Those camps are a very interesting model, being funded by the city. We're having to deal with a lot of the bureaucracy Johnny was talking about. I think that's been the difficult part, but we modeled it with the help of people who were instrumental in Right to Dream 2 and Dignity Village. We modeled it on a village model with some variations because of our city connections. You know, unlike most villages, we being funded by the city, you know, the villagers work and man their own camp, man the security, and do the sanitation and the food, and and passing out the food, and they're paid for these positions, which is a weird model for a village. So in that way, it's very much different from every other village, being that the people living there are making an income for it. But it's very similar to R2D2 and Dignity Village in the way it's structured, and that, you know, we initially set it up with volunteers and staff members from outside the village. And within the first 2 weeks, we started transitioning those roles over to the people actually camping in these shelter-in-place camps. And, went through the usual learning curves and bumps and bruises that a village does as it's forming. And now that they've been established for a few months, we have well-established villages with their own council, their own leadership, which we are working continuously with the city on trying to transplant these 3 to permanent locations on the end of this, to allow them to expand and hopefully move into a tiny home village, each one of them. I was excessively happy to work on this project with so many great individuals. Being homeless myself, it was a labor of love to put these camps together and see them come about. I'm still currently homeless, but you know, we keep working and keep hoping for the best. I think the thing that has made us successful in this was the amount of people who came together in this coalition to build these camps, who had experience building Right to Dream 2 in Dignity Village. We had input from people who live out and, you know, have lived in other villages and had experience with those. This was my first real experience with the villages. with that lifestyle. And I found a lot of, there's a lot of plus and minuses that come with a village. And when you're houseless and living on the street, a tiny home, even so much as a modified shed with a roof over your head and a door is a blessing. And so I was really excited to hear about this, about the coalition here and what you guys were wanting to achieve. I think the factor that has made the C3PO camp so successful is the wealth of knowledge in the coalition that built it and continues to run it and continues to find supplies for it and work out new problems. We're, once again, a very unique setup because we're funded directly by the city. And we have, unlike most villages, an entire medical program. And but for a lot of these people who came into this village, this is the first time they've ever had constant access to porta potties, to fresh water, to steady supplies of food, to a secure area where they're confident that they can leave their things and they'll still be there when they return. And being that has taken away a lot of that worry from them, we've seen a lot of these people start to get things done working with people who come in from Central City Concern and OI to work on paperwork issues and legal issues. And through being able to make an income working these camps, a lot of people have started saving and started bank accounts to try to save to move on to the next thing. So having transitional housing, having low barrier transitional housing is essential to stemming the tide of the homelessness in the Portland area. I've never experienced living in the village. My experience with the village has solely been working there and being there almost every day and becoming ingrained in the lives of the people there and watching how the security and the support has changed them, has taken away certain worries and given them opportunities to excel towards something else. And I think that's the most important part of the whole camps that we built with the city. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Raven. Before we move on to our next person, I just wanted to say that, I think for myself, I found it very humbling and informative to get out into the community and talk to people who are experiencing homelessness. And, recently, this past Tuesday, I was invited by community activist Laquita Lanford to come down and see her exhibit at Floyd's Coffee in Old Town and to talk with some of the folks she's helping to support and some of the folks who are organizing. And in my conversations with at least the people I talked with, these types of options are something that there's a need for. There's a need for more of these types of options. And with that, we'll move on to Andy Olshin. He's the founder of Cascadia Clusters. Andy, take it away.
Hello, folks. In our homes, from the pulpit, in the congregation, in the committee room, in the boardroom, in a Zoom chat, on Facebook, using whatever platform is available to you, please send out a message. Here it is. Every morning, before interacting with others, ask yourself, what one good thing can I do today for someone else I do not know? And how selflessly can I do it? Or, as Rabbi Rachel Joseph taught me, every day is mitzvah day. I could stop right there, but I have 3 minutes. So please, while we're together during this experience, share what you're doing with somebody that isn't on the call right now. You can spread this whole message out over the next hour plus when you're multitasking, communicating with other people, as I'm sure many of us do during these things. While I did agree, why did I agree to prioritizing this time to talk with you? Is because I believe we all deserve better than the quality of life that is currently being experienced in our city. Before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to Raven. Wow. Please get together with Bob Brinnemer at Hazelnut Grove as soon as you can. Let's see if we can get you housed. If anyone else in the call has ideas where this advocate can get safely housed, please step forward behind the scenes, of course. I hope everybody leaves this call with 2 to 3 understandings that matter to them, or at a minimum resonate with you. I'd like to offer just a couple of mine. 1, homelessness in Portland is at public health crisis levels. Together, we must share more with the hardest core, most chronic subset of the homeless population. I will repeat that. We must share more. I'm not saying give everything out, whatever. We must share with them where they are surviving. Many are working in places and with folks to contribute to the healing effort. Some faith organizations, many of which have been doing amazing good deeds for generations. Seasoned public servants like Lucas Hillier from behind the scenes, nonprofits like Street Roots, Sisters of the Road Cafe, Join, Hygiene for Oil, Agape Village, Stone Soup, Hazelnut Grove, R2D2, Do Good Multnomah, Shine With Us, Cascadia Clusters. Not to leave out my favorite elected officials, Sharon Myron and Maxine Dexter. Contact some of these folks, any of them, these folks, ask them what they need and let them talk with you. Spend a little time with them, go on site, visit the tents, visit the campgrounds, visit anybody that is experiencing this, talk with them and get their perspective. My mother told me, number 2, if you care about something, invest in it. Just so I remember to put $1 reference in during my time here, how about $500? That, I believe, is the amount it would take to keep a Portlander alternatively sheltered for 1 month. So please pick a day next month or the next, save up for a few months. Please go with your brothers and sisters, friends, coworkers, have an event to raise awareness and the $500 and invest in our community. Buy a month of safety off the streets for someone trying to get out of a crappy situation. They're taking a step towards recovery from whatever had driven them to our hollow streets. Number 3, ask our governor to make it easy for organized groups of houseless individuals to get a very low cost permit to be recognized as having permission to safely sleep in tents on platforms at designated safe sleep areas throughout the state of Oregon. This is no reason to do this as a citywide thing. We currently have a perfect example called Agape Village that has the awareness of the governor. So I think a public campground, safe sleep area that you could get a license for by the state to remain in place for a minimum of like 6 months. Okay? So I've been asked to just lay out 3 things. So that's them. And I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you very much, Andy. If folks have questions, I think the easiest way would be to raise.
If you want to handle through chat, yeah.
Through chat, okay. Yeah, if you could type your question in chat, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, and thank all of the speakers. You were incredible, and Raven especially. Thank you for giving us your heart. Thanks. I want to, if I could just lead off with one question, Carol Turner with the Interfaith Alliance, and just go back to Tim and just you and I in a former conversation you had listed 3 things that you felt were really core aspects of this sort of approach, and I'm not sure we covered them all. One was some ability of self-determination, and then you also talked about a neighborhood really having a working agreement with a neighborhood that it's with, something like that. And then I think you also talked about, does it meet your basic human needs of safe and decent place to sleep, hygiene,
Right.
that sort of stuff. Was I missing anything else of those 3?
No, I think that's right. You asked me this impromptu the other week, and I hadn't really formulated, and I just kind of that's what came to right off the top of my head.
Okay.
I was like, number one, you must have some kind of working accommodation with the community somehow. As I said, it could be an armed standoff. That would be one form, not the preferred one, but you know, one way or another, the more amiable, the better. And that's life and death. That can determine the entire fate of it. And what we see is that there's high fear and tension, but it can work out very well. And like R2D2 has a really good relationship with its local neighborhood groups. It's working out great. And then, so that was number one. Number two, what came out was oriented towards resident self-determination. And that can be to differing degrees, there can be differing roles, but it has to be central in some way. It cannot be simply a place you check into or are checked into. That is not, that's a traditional shelter or what we don't want. And then thirdly, does it allow you to be a full human being? Does it provide the minimum that we consider dignified life? And that doesn't mean a lot of space necessarily. What that means is a door that shuts. It means security of your person and your belongings. It means respect of your rights, a process to deal with grievance, right? And those are a lot of things that a lot of people of all incomes don't have, actually. You know, and so, but we can afford to give that to everybody. I have no doubt. You know.
Great. Sean just sent me an email asking me to kind of take over so he can work on making sure we have the breakup groups doing. So I will. Thank you, Tim, for just reinforcing that. I wanted to make sure we had that. And just let me just say that we'll have some time for questions, but we have an email that I want to give to you, and I think you've already been given it, but I want to reinforce it. So if you have this email and you have a specific question of one of the speakers and you don't have time to ask it here, or it's a longer conversation, the email is PDX Shelter Forum, PDX Shelter Forum, and maybe somebody can type that in the chat box, @gmail.com. This will go to a source. If you would put in it the speaker that you want to connect with and the question, that would be helpful. Then we can funnel that to them. We'll also, I think, be sending out, if you had agreed to have your email on the list, then we'll be sending that. But I think the fastest way is to get that. Thank you, Tim. PDX Shelter Forum @gmail. He just put it in the chat box type thing. So I see one of the questions here. Tom Hickey, welcome. What's the ideal size of a supported community? Do you all have views on that of the speakers? Who wants to unmute yourself?
Well,
Okay, Raven, sure.
Yeah. I think from my experience, the ideal size of a community realistically is one in which they can, you know, it all depends, on the property that they are housed on. You know, you want to give everybody their fair amount of space to have that breathing room, but really an ideal size would, to me, would never really be over. I agree with Tim, would never be over 50 people. I mean, communities work best when they're small to mid-size and everybody has a voice. When they become too large, voices started to get drowned out and problems start because it's hard to manage that many people and tend to everyone's needs. So I think villages work best when they're you know, small to medium, in between 20 to 50 people, and they're a small community that supports and looks out for each other.
And Andy, do you have any follow-up on that from your experience?
Well, hold on a second. Can you repeat the question just briefly?
Well, just the thoughts about, is there an ideal size and the issue of size, which does affect then what you end up working on, obviously, yeah.
You know, I don't think there's an ideal size. I think there's a minimum of 3 units in a parking lot at a church, say. Maybe taking up all of 9 parking spots as a little cluster type community would be my minimum. It's probably not worth it to have less than that. And then on the maximum side, I would defer to the folks that live in these situations. I think it depends on how big the lot is. I think it depends on a lot of things.
Okay.
But 30 is a reasonable number, as reasonable as any. 50, maybe. It depends on how big it is, how separate people can be and have their privacy without getting into negative stuff. I mean, a lot of folks in these situations have dual diagnoses, a lot of challenges. We just have to acknowledge that. And, you know, frankly, look to Douglas Multnomah, who I think probably has the most, I don't want to say lived experience, but worked experience with this, and has been very successful from a combination of a self-governed village and some support. And I don't know, you know, people will have to self-determine exactly how much they need as a community in order to help. Hazelnut Grove has been around for a while, and they have had several individuals down there that have been very challenging, and they have become their brethren and worked with them and helped them through some significant crises. So anyway, that's where I would say on size.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I just want to say, Danny Karos of several different groups has been working on a matrix that we attached actually to the invitation you received that really is trying to capture some of the basic information about cost per person, how much it costs to develop, et cetera. So you might go back to that original invitation, and I think click on the key link and it's included in that. And Danny, actually, since I see you here on my screen, I suggest you put your view on speaker view, so that if you're on gallery view, maybe switch to speaker view so that whoever's speaking, you can see them clearly. And Danny, I'm going to ask your help because I'm not seeing that many questions, and I can't scroll back to some of the earlier questions. We have great ideas that we'll compile, and also I think what we'll also do is try after this is to compile a Q&A to respond to some of the earlier questions. But Denny, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling through, and maybe at this point we can take some questions, quote, from the floor, but if you raise your hands. So. Do you see any questions here? Okay, Tuck Wilson first, and then Patricia. Unmute yourself, okay. Yeah, check.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Carol. So without regard to which of the choices are selected, they all need land. There needs to be a place, and then the features about that place determine the choices. So let's talk about land and how you find sites for any of these choices.
Well, we will have 2 breakout groups on that specific topic shortly, but does anybody want to respond to that of the speakers?
Sure,
John,
Karen.
yeah.
I can do that. So from a siting perspective, I think we've got a lot of folks already on this call that have spent time looking at these things. And where this comes down to in my book is there a group at a particular faith-based organization that could make a 6-month commitment, let's say, to make this kind of thing happen? I do think, again, that Commissioner Udaley gave us a gift a couple of years ago, and we have not really taken advantage of it. As of right, putting 3 people, or whatever you want to say, tiny houses on wheels, tents on platforms, RVs, cars, on property owned by a faith-based organization without having to go through a significant process. And I think that is the lowest hanging fruit. Thank you, Commissioner Udaley, for that. And talking with, frankly, Agape Village and saying, Pastor Huff, I'm not sure if you're on this call, but please let us know, what do you need? I know that you're already experiencing what we call the Agape Blitz. I've been following you guys on Facebook. I would encourage more people to do that. Go down there, take a visit, see what we did, see what they need, help them. You know, that goes also directly for R2D2. Really stepped up. What can we do to help these folks? We should be strengthening the boards of directors of these organizations. We should be adding private resources, adding faith resources. We have those in our community. It's time to reach down into the deep pockets that we can and participate. If we paid for half, our community paid for half, then government could do a lot more with this. So if let's just say that this costs $40 per night per unit, which could be a tent with 2 people in it, however you want to call a unit. If the external community, the non-governmental community, came up with $20 a night times whatever that number is that we think will access that kind of a situation. Let's say it's 500 as the first goal. Let's try to raise the resources to give 500 people by the end of the summer this kind of safety off the street. Can we do that as a community? Let's challenge ourselves. Let's do it right now.
Great. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to call on, it's Patricia at Patricia. She raised her hand. Yes, that's you. If you can unmute yourself, please. And we'll do the last question, and then other questions we'll capture in the.
Sure. I served on the National Board of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, for years and worked on these issues as I have in New York with community access. And, you know, there's a great component of mental illness, and not necessarily people who were always mentally ill, but many people will become mentally ill if they're living in the most unbelievable situation on the street. I know I would personally if I spent a month living under a bridge in a tent. So I think that's the elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, not just diagnosis, but the ability to monitor people, many of whom can be helped with a steady medication, but they have to be encouraged to take it and have some monitoring system. They don't necessarily need a whole social service department, but there should be visiting help that goes in and brings people to the attention of mental health providers and gets them diagnosed and on sufficient medication that they are then ensured that they can access.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to direct that question to Jonny, because with his experience in that, and if you could just give a brief answer before we move on to the breakout groups, Jonny.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, mental health is always going to be a struggle, whether someone's experiencing houselessness or not. And so what we're able to provide, and of course there's lots of different models. We have a mental health specialist that's there part-time, and our goal is being the support, because we don't have the budget to be able to have an entire staff to provide medical and mental health resources. What we do is we specialize in the support and either bringing the mental health to them or bringing them to the mental health providers themselves. It's making those appointments, working with our participants and the villagers' schedules to make sure that they don't forget about their meetings they have, and checking up on them and making sure it's like, especially when COVID-19 hit, the first thing on my agenda was, all right, we need to make sure everyone here has 2 months supply of medication.
Mm-hmm.
So that was our number one goal, is working with them, making sure the follow through happens. Because another part of the thing is after they graduate from our program, if it's just permanent housing instead of permanent supportive housing, they're not going to have that support. So helping them be able to get the tools to be able to get the needs they need are super important.
Okay, thanks, Jonny. And of course, we all, I think, are feeling really good about the Metro tax measure, passing. That money won't come in for another year plus, but that will directly help the support services like that. I do want to do a shout out to our public officials who are either on this call or have staff. I just saw Commissioner Udaley's on this call, and we have staff people from Hardesty's office and several other offices. I think we have some candidates who are running for office, and welcome. And I know Commissioner Jayapal from the county and Myron, I think, have staff, and apologies for anybody else who might be here, but we really tried to reach out, and we were very pleased that we were able to connect with the city and the county officials. And I think we have some people from the state level too, in addition to other things. So at this point, we're pretty much on schedule. Great. So I'd like to just say a few words about the breakout rooms. Really, it's to help everybody increase your knowledge and understanding, which I think we've had a great beginning of what does it mean to consider these sort of options, interim options, and then kind of get a sense of where you are. Are you interested in continuing with this? Again, we acknowledge the breadth of people's knowledge, but this will give you a little chance to especially focus on the range of, so what are the considerations we should be thinking about? We've already gotten some great chat about different sites, but just generally, what, okay, so you can look at one site, but what are the criteria underneath that should guide people's thinking about, say, that issue or whatever issue you are? You have been assigned, we've tried to get you to one or two, to get to one of your preferences, but you may end up in a surprise, who knows where you might end up being. And as we know, each group will actually have a skilled facilitator. We'll have a content expert who will just kick off for about 2 to 3 minutes, kind of their overall view, and you will have a recorder who, kind of the old-fashioned way, taking notes the old-fashioned way. We ask that you continue your mute button for now. If you want to, and you can go on click on your name, you can also add your organization, so that as you do some feedback in the breakout rooms, people can kind of, okay, that person comes from that orientation, or kind of that. Again, there are opportunities for you to interact. You were sent a Google Doc originally in that invitation. If you're familiar with Google Doc, you can definitely enter your thoughts on that. Go back and find that. Again, the PDX Shelter Forum at gmail.com is another way for you to continue to add your thoughts and stuff within that. So
I'm still unmuted. While you're tinkering with that, can I just throw in
yeah, sure.
note or two? One of them is that we do have an attendee list. You may remember when you signed up, there was a thing that said, like, do you want to not be on this list? So we have available that list. We can send it out with the email after the event. It's also currently up off the event page. I guess I could put a link in the chat, but it's out there. So what it has on it, it was done at around 8 p.m. last night. So there are some people it didn't get who registered after it. We may do an update. And it basically has those people who said, yes, I'm okay with being on the public list, which was about 150 out of the 180 people. And it has what information they said yes put down there. Has like email address, many have phone numbers, and also has their affiliation. So it's pretty useful if you want to, reach out to other people. That's going to help you a lot, I think.
Great.
Well, sorry about the snafu on this, and I do want to mention this is, it was a 20-minute breakout, and we're just trying to catalyze conversation and discussion constructively, but this is really just kind of opening round or inning. And one thing we can do is, it's kind of a useful thing, just that people self-identified around these topics, and we can sort of help connect those groups, even if you don't manage to get into the group today. Because if you got in the group, it was a pretty brief sprint that was going to happen in that 20-minute group. So we'll see.
I'll jump in with one item. Eli Spievak, I'm with the Planning Sustainability Commission in Portland. Yeah. And if people don't know about this already, there's a code update in the works called a Housing Continuum Code. And I see the staff on that project are in this session right now. Mm-hmm. And so there is a train already going through the station to do some zoning reform in Portland to make it easier for expensive housing options. And if anything, I think that code project should be expanded and maybe even more staff resources applied to it, so we can cover some ideas that might come out of this group.
Right. And Eli, did I catch you correctly? Are you referring to Shelter to Housing Continuum Project? And do I have the name of that right? Eli?
I'll let Al maybe. So on our agenda, it says Housing Continuum Code Project, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay, I think that is the same thing. Yeah, it's morphed in name a little bit. Yeah. And what is the status of it that you are seeing?
Well, I will say that it's coming to the PSC on our draft agenda for October for a decision in December of this year. And it talks about group living situations. It takes some of the things that were adopted as part of the housing emergency and makes them permanent so they don't cease to be legal if the housing emergency is ended.
Right.
But I'm not going to speak too much on about it because I know people on this call who are working specifically on that project. But it is not yet in discussion draft form. That'll go out to the public. I'm not sure when. It's not quite out yet.
Right. Anyone else? Comments, questions?
I can, my name's Al Burns. I can comment on the project. In the chat, I put up a link to the Shelter to Housing Continuum project. It's got a been web page now, but it will grow. And it does address several things that were discussed earlier. It is adding a category called outdoor shelters that will, what was called villages in the earlier discussion, which aren't presently legal under the Portland zoning code in many places, but are allowed under the emergency ordinance, and those will be allowed in the code proposal. They would be allowed temporarily for 180 days, and then they could be made more permanent through a conditional use or a council resolution. So there would be a two-track project for that. Also, I realize when we do these kinds of city projects, people are navigating our bureaus, and sometimes they get this kind of direction. And this project's unusual because it goes through several titles of the city code and adjust authorities of many city bureaus to get to our desired outcome. It also expands where group living is allowed, both the where and the how. It will essentially legalize roommates and allow these big old houses that have one or two people living in them now to provide more housing opportunities for Portland. Those are just a couple of components. We hope to have a draft code out available for public review and engagement. And if you see fit, I would be pleased with an invitation to present to this group later on this summer when there's more to share.
Great, thank you, Al. I didn't quite catch your timetable there. You're saying you're moving towards issuing a draft, and when would that be? Later in the summer?
Yeah, later this summer. October would be our first PSC meeting.
First PSC meeting, okay. And so they would consider that draft, presumably. Okay.
Right, and so we would like to do lots of engagement before that first PSC meeting in order to catalog proposed amendments and how to make this project better as it goes through the hearings process.
I see. Now, I want to clarify one thing that I think both Eli and Al mentioned that not everybody may be following, but there's a significant issue here from many people's standpoint, villages and the city, which is that a number of things are presently authorized under emergency declarations, which will expire unless extended. Now, the most imminent is COVID-19 state level, which I believe is currently slated, July, possibly extended, could be re-declared in the fall. But things like C3PO camps are strictly predicated on that, and they are under agreements that they have to vacate at the end of it. So the people there and the people running them are highly focused on that and what to do. And then other things are predicated directly upon the City of Portland state of housing emergency from a couple years ago. And I forget when exactly that expires, but that's another Pandora's box. So this basically moves these things to the front of the queue of attention, because things will disrupt and break, right? So that's the picture. Yeah.
Project purpose is to take things that are done under the state of emergency now,
right,
and tiptoe through several chapters of the city code and make things, have them a legal pathway under the ordinary code rather than code suspension because of an emergency.
Right. Legalization.
Exactly.
Housing is not a crime.
Right, yeah, it will be lawful to do good.
Yeah, well, that's great. And then I had a question. Did you say that what you're contemplating now is, what did you call them? Outdoor shelters approval for 180 days, and then it could be continued by conditional use?
It could be continued by conditional use or by council resolution. So there would be two tracks for continuation. So there would be easy to start up and two ways to continue.
If you did a conditional use, how long could that at one time extend it?
Indefinitely.
So,
but that would be discussed in the conditional use hearings procedure.
I'm seeing Andrew, I think Andrew Constantino. Anyone else meanwhile?
I have a question. You mentioned shared housing earlier, and it sounded as though there wasn't something already in place in that regard here in Portland. And I just wanted to check to see if the folks from Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon are tied into this conversation in any way, because they've been running a program like that for a number of years. And changing the zoning perhaps would even allow more roommates in an older house legally. As it is now, they're pairing people very carefully, support in terms of check-in and how things are being, how rent or in-kind service or whatever agreements are negotiated and then honored over time. So I just wondered if that program is still going or if you are aware of it.
And who are you directing the question to?
Anybody. You,
okay.
I guess you in particular, since you mentioned shared housing, but.
Okay, right. Well, I think Al and Eli and other people would probably might have the same answer, but I think what you're referring to is Metro Home Share, of which Ecumenical Ministries is, I'm not sure the organizer, is at least a participant. And I would say, yes, there is, I am hearing about it from all sides all the time as a major point of interest.
Great.
I know that Portland Neighbors Welcome is very interested in helping that. I guess one question is to Al is, does the shelter to housing initiative touch upon that area of home share? I guess it does. You just mentioned that it helps ease that, right?
Right. Right now, group living in our single dwelling residential zones is a conditional use. The current proposal would make that an allowed use. It's something that I believe we need to do to comport with state law, because group living is a form of needed housing and state law requires that we provide for needed housing under clear and objective standards rather than conditional use proceedings. So that's one of the big changes in the proposed code, in addition to having this new outdoor shelter category.
Okay, and I mean, to comment on that, that sounds minor, or it could sound minor. Okay, groups are allowed, but this is potentially huge, because there are a lot of people out there who I know are keen on this angle, and the Turner Center at Berkeley did a great study about this. And the point they make is that we have tons of housing and built space out there that is like for the taking, if you can find a way to like divide, manage it, get people to it. Okay, it might be a little spread out more than you want, but I'm reminded that a guy I know who's the founder of Wiki House in London, he's an architect, but surprisingly for an architect, he likes to say the most expensive possible solution to any problem is to build a new building. And so it's to that point, that we actually, there's tons of built space. We have extremely large lots, we have extremely large houses, we have a ton of empty nests, all these things. So unlocking that by whatever means possible is potentially huge. So.
Right. Before we began the code markup, we did some background studies, hired an economist, and quite frankly, the key component to providing any of these alternatives is, the cost of urban land. So basically, people need to find free or discounted land to provide many of these housing forms. But when we are looking at unlocking group living, as you said, the lot and the house are already there. The investment's already been made. It's an underutilized investment, and it's a free way to expand housing opportunities without the cost of land entry cost.
Yeah. And in that regard, it has a lot in common with ADUs. Sorry, go ahead, Eli.
Oh, and I'll chime in that people's yards are also already available. And currently there are hundreds or thousands of people living in them in vehicles of some sort, some tiny homes that are cute, some RVs. And I guess I'll note that this code project does not currently address those housing types, dispersed impact on people parking on private property, sleeping in technically vehicles, not sleeping on the street, and not in vehicles on the street. But that's an element of this code update that is not in there right now. It is currently unenforced to sleep in a vehicle on private property, up to one vehicle per property. But that relies on whoever's in charge of the Bureau of Development Services Bureau at City Council.
Yeah.
It's not actually a code allowing. So it sort of decriminalized it based on the Chloe Daly is the person who decided to stop enforcing that. And I understand that when the Bureau was shifted over to the mayor's office, he is also not enforcing it. But people in that situation don't have any assurance that that continues to be a place that they can live.
Yeah. And to restate that, Eli is pointing out that just like the spare space in empty nest homes, we've got tons of spare space that are just yards around homes. I mean, typically what, 2/3 of a lot, right? And you can of course build a full-blown ADU. The problem is you're looking right now at getting quoted $200K for that, or you were 6 months ago, right? Something like that. And so you naturally might ask, and many people have done, well, I can buy a trailer or this van and drive it down that driveway. And because there is this regime of currently from UDALY of essentially sanctioning it in the sense of not enforcing it, there are a lot of people doing it. There always were, but even more. But it's in a gray zone. And I know, for example, a guy who actually has a startup company based on this angle, and his whole prospect, I mean, he's like ready to go to roll out hundreds of these on the basis of them being vehicle. But of course, it's largely in suspension with his investors, with his homeowners, because it's just a gray zone. It's not legal. So I'd say so my angle is, what I would tend to say is, if it's happening widely now and the sky's not falling, why not say legalize it? Maybe, for a while at least. They're vehicles, right? So let's say you legalize it, if you put this into code somehow, and the worst imaginable thing happens. The barbarians flood in with minivans and take over areas of town. Okay, well, 2 years later, we can evaluate it and change that. Then they can drive the car away. We're not talking about like we're permanently going to tear up the earth and build giant buildings, right? So I'd say here's a case where there's even more reason to sort of have a bias towards action. And also, I would say there are other ways that this could be perhaps made a lot more palatable and less risky. For example, you could have conditions or standards or approval of like what the vehicles are. And you could do that on the street as well. Now, like I said, there are multiple people living in RVs like within a block of my front door. And I'm not personally bothered. In fact, I park my car and buy them because I think they keep an eye on it, like I used to do in Oakland. And other people are just threatened and unsettled by that. Who are these people? But it's like, well, of course you're unsettled if some completely random unknown UFO lands on your block. You have no idea what this vehicle is or who they are. But why do that? We can manage this. You can have what I call a parking dwelling permit. You can do it. You just need the permit, which means we know who you are and there's a license number in the window. And likewise, for what Eli is describing, for vehicles parked on property, you could do the same thing. You can get a permit for this, hypothetically, but it has these conditions. And if you don't meet them or you violate them or it expires, then you're no longer valid. So the point is, you can manage it. There's sorry to rattle on, but we've been given a gift of time here, but there's a saying, Eli, you probably know this one, but there's a planner, Andres Duaney, who's a famous planner and sort of founder of the New Urban Congress. And he has a funny saying he likes to roll out. And he says, if the pizza is free, there's never enough pizza. And what he's actually talking about is parking. And his point is that everyone is always complaining about parking, and it's the #1 objection. But normally we're doing absolutely nothing to manage it, to try and allocate it. So of course it's not working out. It's like free pizza gets taken. But he's like, so manage it. You know, have a permit program, right? Or try it at least. So.
Hey, Tim, there are a couple participants with their hands up.
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. There was someone else paying attention to those hands. Okay, Linda. Linda's Netikoven is one. Are you able to unmute, or do you know how?
I do. Are you hearing me again?
Yes. Go ahead.
Just wanted to mention, you know, again, the concern about the horde sweeping in. I'm part of the group that was working on a safe parking project for several years, just volunteers on our own trying to get city government to collaborate with us. But we did tour the project down in Eugene, and they've been doing this for a long time, and they do scattered sites. You know, I think it's maybe 3 to half dozen cars or vans, and they work a lot with industrial sites, and they have one staff person, the amazing Keith, who basically makes sure that folks are, you know, have permission to be there, observe certain basic rules, are getting along with each other. He tries to sometimes, I think, arrange people that he knows in groups that are going to be compatible even. But it's, you know, it's been going on for years and seems to work fine. I last talked to Seraphy from the mayor's office at Ted Wheeler's first town hall on houselessness, and she said, well, we set up the project, you know, for the 3 vehicles on church sites, and we couldn't get, you know, folks to be takers on it. But the issue, they didn't look at all at commercial sites or, you know, other sorts of parking lot sites or whatever that might work in other locations. And some of the church, I don't know, some of the churches were close to schools or whatever, there were the challenges, but this has already been working in other places. And it seems like kind of we're behind the game in this one in Portland. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Linda's Netikoven. Sandy, are you there? Can you unmute? Go ahead if you are. Maybe she got dispatched to another. No, Sandy, there you are. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I raised my hand back when they were asking who was still needing to be put in a group.
Okay.
Goes back to that. I'm listening. Okay. I'm involved with Maddie's Cart, the Madeline Parish, and a little bit with Interfaith Alliance, but I'm here basically to learn more today.
Oh, great. Well, you know, one of the people from Maddie's Cart who registered put in a comment and said, we have this proposal that we pass around. And this was like #1 on my to-do list to follow up on that. So maybe I can get a sneak preview. Is this ringing a bell with you?
I think
like 2 or 3 people. Yeah, go ahead.
That might have been from Will Deneke, and he's been sort of working adjunct with us, trying to find land that could be developed. We called it mini landings. And we had a little experience without any city permission that of course didn't last more than about a week maybe. And then we were notified tents were coming down, either move our stuff or they would take it. And that's been almost a year ago.
I can just ask for forgiveness rather than permission on that one, right?
We did. And one of the things in retrospect that I think we learned is that the disruption it caused to our friends that we helped move there was terrible. And so we're very cautious looking for places for those on the street that if you move them, it will really be permanent as you can make happen, so that we don't disrupt a life that they're somehow making work. And then all of a sudden, boom, they're back out finding places again. So that was one of our key learnings. Anyway, I'm going to unmute.
Okay.
Tim, Michaela Smith has her hand up.
Yes. I think Heather Flint did sooner. Heather, are you there?
That's fair.
Hi there. Yeah. Thank you. I'm an environmental designer and planner, and we have a 20,000 square foot site with a tiny house artist eco village proposed. And we're losing a lot of our local artists because of needing affordable housing. And it's an existing, a site that has an existing house on it, and we want to maximize the use of the site. but there is not a pathway to do that. And although the Shelter to Housing Continuum project may provide more options for group living, it will not work for tiny houses on wheels. And so sort of curious if there might be some other options to include that in the Shelter to Housing Continuum project, or also to consider some things like City of Redmond did an innovative housing demonstration code where they allowed for a variety of options that didn't include tiny houses, but something like that could be done in Portland to allow for a certain number of innovative demonstration projects that could then be evaluated and tested to see how that might work on larger existing land that is already owned. The cost of the land is not a consideration, but to really maximize that site, and then to be able to later, if higher density might be developed there, those could be relocated instead of demolished. So I'll post a link to that code.
Oh, yes,
And I'd like to encourage the city to maybe consider how some kind of one tiny houses could be used and integrated into this policy. So it's not just 180 days, but also if there's a concern there, how might we be encouraging some more innovative housing models? So I'm wondering if others could maybe speak to that if there's interest from we need a little more political will, I think.
Redmond, who knew? I didn't.
Hey, Tim,
Yes.
this is Carol asked me to give the 1-minute warning here very soon. So I'll just let you know that the crowds are going to come hoarding back in here.
Well, we're in the main room, so I think what will happen is people will rejoin us.
Exactly.
Right. So we can just be the friendly small talk while that happens. Michaela did have her hand up. Are you still there, Michaela?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes.
Wonderful. So I just wanted to share, oh, sorry, I'm listening. Okay, I just wanted to share some experience with both Agape Village and with the Providence program I work for. We had a project where we were trying to get car camping and Conestoga huts, alternative shelter models up in Clackamas County. And we worked on that project for about 1.5 years. And one barrier that we ran into was the permit process that we were asked to go through was housed in land use, which meant that there was a public opinion period and neighbors were able to appeal. So in retrospect, we wish we had done some better community outreach, but there's also been some discussion around how trying to develop these programs would be much more successful if it wasn't housed in land use. Because that's such a burdensome process and can be really controversial. Versus my experience with Agape Village, where we applied for a permit, a campground permit, and did not run into that public pushback.
Right. Can you, Michaela, get that point to us somehow, whether in the chat here or in the Google Doc or by emailing it? I want to make sure we, get that. And I'm not. We will review the video, but if you can ping it to our attention, that would help.
Okay.
Let's see. Do we? Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, I'm back here. I'm just checking in with Sarah Bell to see our groups returning at this point.
Everyone's here.
Everyone should be here. Carol,
Okay.
Let's give a quick announcement.
Okay.
I just want to note for people who, the Google Doc is editable now. Briefly, it was not editable, so folks can add your thoughts to it now. You have permission. Some people asked, how long do they have to add comments to this, to the Google Doc? And I just want to say that our goal as a planning committee and as the co-sponsors is to get some notes back to the participants within a week. And so I would say if you're able to, by perhaps next Tuesday, provide your feedback, that would be great. That being said, the document's not going to go away. So if you have some thoughts later on, feel free to add them, but it'd be great to add them by next Tuesday. And yep, thank you.
Okay, great. So Sarah Bella, everybody has returned, right? Great.
You have 97 people.
Okay, Okay, super. So what we wanted to do now is just have the content expert was going to share kind of one learning that they got from this breakout session, and two, or kind of a hope that they got. So first, as we plan this, I envisioned certain hiccups, so to speak. I didn't ever envision this hiccup, that we would not be able to go into our breakup room. So I'm sorry if you all, at least we had a nice intimate conversation among 6 of us, but it was supposed to be 25. So apologies again to the facilitators who were prepared for working with a larger group. And thank you, Tim, for handling the people in the larger group who stayed behind. It's a different format. So hopefully, you got something out of that, or got some of your questions answered, or got some new ideas type thing. So let's see. I don't have in front of me right now who some of the other content experts were. I think Sean was one. Let's start with Adam. It's Adam Lyons. Where are you, Adam?
I'm here. Sorry, I was
Okay.
muting myself.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Just share one aha or.
Well, yeah, we were in costs and financing, and we had a small group, and I mean, I think I was just really impressed. Obviously, it's a pretty sort of impassioned subject, but how informed and interested people are in finding proactive solutions that meet people where they're at. I just find that really inspiring, and I'm hoping that it makes me really hopeful that we can find a solution that serves everyone. So
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
And then just remind people, hopefully each group ended up with a recorder also, and we also were recording that session too, so we'll be able to capture that. So Keith Jones, if you put yourself again on speaker view, I'm talking to myself here, so we know.
I'm on speaker view, I think.
Thank you.
You can see me? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I think my takeaway from it is the same as when I usually participate in this, is that there are a lot of great ideas out there, and a lot of ways that we're trying to, as a community, help each other. And I think that places and forums like this are important, because it doesn't help if I do something in my community and no one ever hears about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's important to see, providing opportunities for other people to learn from each other, not just our successes, but also maybe our mistakes and failures.
Mm-hmm.
And so I heard a lot of great ideas. I can't sum up into one specific issue, but these are things that I think that, if we approach all of this with openness and inclusion for everyone, I think that we can all work together to get some stuff done.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Andy Olshin, you had a group on siting and zoning.
Sure. Just really quickly, I think that one of the things we can do in the next 30 days is, out of this group, have a village outreach group to visit the old town site, ask the residents what they believe is working for them, and then really connect with some technical assistance and some folks in the private sector and the faith community in how can we enable this village to evolve and to remain in that area, I think, at least for another 6 months, and see if the other two on the east side are, if that's viable as well. Great. I would strengthen and increase the capacity at Agape Village. I think that there is an enormous amount of potential out there. There are hundreds of people camping in the outer southeast area. And that organization has just been phenomenal. I wish we could have afforded as an organization to still survive and stay out there working with them. I understand that Pastor Ron Clark is doing his Agape Blitz this summer out there. And I would encourage folks to contact Michaela or Pastor Huff to get involved. I think that doing a hygiene hub, that would be another thing. We could have a faith-based hygiene hub. There's a great place on the parking lot of Congregation Beth Israel on 1972 Flanders for a mobile hygiene hub. I think the Genesis Community Fellowship, which is out there, has zoned RM1 definitely has room for a cluster of 3,000 plus a unit if other congregations wanted to get together and make that possibility. The Westminster Presbyterian Church has like a 15,000 square foot above ground parking lot zoned RM2. Could be another great site for a cluster of 3 with laundry and shower, and folks that are currently in the villages in Old Town on the east side could be the candidates for these smaller, more intimate, more resource rich situations that could be the next step in their transition out of homelessness. There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy. Yeah. Let's see, there's Sean, Tim, and myself who all ended up as content experts. Who wants to go next? Sean, were you able to join
Sure.
your group?
Yeah, I will go.
Okay.
So I was in one of the political will groups. I think the hope is that we can all work together, government, nonprofits, religious organizations, neighborhood associations, you know, and others, so that we can advance the types of things we're talking about. And the specific takeaway points, we had some really great discussion. In order to educate people, it would be great to have some standard documents describe the diversity of housing, its effectiveness, and how it plays a key piece as part of transitioning people to permanent long-term housing. And finally, that we need to understand there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, even within the types of things we're talking about. And so if we could create some documentation to effectively communicate that with elected officials, with planners, with community organizations, that would go a long way to supporting advancing the political will.
Yeah, great. Tim, yeah.
Well, I didn't get thrown into that room to be the content expert, which is a good thing because that room was filled with people way more expert than me on that topic. I was going to just pass the baton to them on that because they were a lot of bureau planning people.
And this is citing and zoning also, just to let people know.
Yeah. So I did what I actually tend to do at real world conferences, which is hang out in the lobby rather than in the breakout room, because that's where the coffee is, and I'm usually deeply in need of it by that time. And there's sort of something about, like, you know, the group you weren't invited, the group of people that didn't go to one of the other groups is the group you want to be in, or something. You know, the after party is the one you want, is the party you want. Anyway, so we had an we took questions basically. We talked a lot about shelter to housing continuum, which is really important, and we should really foreground this because that's kind of the biggest main vehicle at city government level addressing the things we're talking about here. You might also say that the Metro Bond measure is a crucial potential intersection, but less obviously so. So I want to foreground that point particularly. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Did anyone from the other group looking at citing and zoning want to speak up? I don't know if there was a facilitator in there who could share something, or one of the members, recorder from that subgroup. I assume there was supposed to be another citing and zoning, Liz Field facilitating.
Sure. If anyone else wants to speak up from that group, please do. If not, I can share a point.
I had a brief comment, but I was only there for part of it. And that was just that I think the role of Metro shouldn't be underestimated, and they could provide that regional overview in terms of citing and zoning, then with input from the different cities and so forth. And I know that another person in our group brought that up. And, you know, just now that we've got the opportunity, while they have some funding, I'm not sure how they would throw it at, you know, adding to the 2040 map, but something like that, I'd really like to see. It could prevent redundancies across programs. It could share information and data. It could be an information hub for the region. And that's sort of my passion right now, would be to see that happen. But I know there are a lot of ideas after I had to jump out for a call, so I'll stop talking.
Thanks. So going back to Liz then.
Sure. I think one of the themes that came up is the importance of having clarity around barriers and constraints at the government level, and how those may have changed, and to be up to date on what those are, and also to build on to build on efforts underway and not try to launch off in a different direction. So the importance of collaboration.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So the group I was content expert in was Building Political Will. We really renamed it to Building Public Will first, and then Political Will is really what it's about. And I think the key word that came across to people in this group was now. That's what attracted them to this whole conversation. What can we do now? And I think ideas are already bubbling up. Andy's thrown out about 10, right, Andy? And others of you are suggesting having great conversations in that. This has to be backed up with an really in-depth educational approach to people to really just even understand the basic facts. And so that they really understand what's in it for the person who's the unsheltered person, and the belief that something can happen that improves for the better public, because we definitely heard about the frustration of the public who feels pretty discouraged right now about that. So with that, I'll just add my thanks, and I'm going to turn it over to the other two members. We had a great planning group, Sean, myself, Les Wardener, who's incoming chair of the Interfaith Coalition, and then Adam Lyons, who's executive director of the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods. So we're gonna turn it over to Les and to Adam to turn it over. So going back to your speaker view.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Les Wardener. I'll be assuming the chairmanship of the excuse me, the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty, July 1st. Carol will remain actively involved. And I've been actively involved myself in building up to not only this summit, but work within the Alliance around how to work with the unsheltered and bring some really some important solutions. I want to thank everybody as one of the co-sponsors. The Alliance, we really want to thank all the participants for joining us today, and certainly the speakers, the facilitators, the experts, the note takers. Your contribution was invaluable, and we really do appreciate it. When Sean Green came to the Alliance, I guess only about 2 weeks ago, and said we should really do a forum, the Alliance team, I think, thought, well, how can we do that? And fortunately, we very quickly transitioned to we must do that. We feel very, very strongly that this is an area of the overall homelessness and housing situation within Portland that does demand immediate attention. The now is something that we definitely want added to all of our notes about the meeting. And we are very, very serious about moving forward. We hope to get our thoughts organized and get things back to you within the next few days. We do have a team that is meeting with some senior advisors to the mayor on Monday at 11 o'clock. We'll be prepping for that. So we'll be passing this on to more people within the city immediately. And we also have a similar session planned with one of the city commissioners. And we'll be following up with lots of different organizations that showed up in the notes and in this meeting. So once again, thank you so much. We are serious about building a coalition, and you'll be hearing from us very soon. We have, the clock is ticking, and we've got to work fast and work effectively together. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam. If Adam is not still on, I think we can, Carol, I think we can go ahead and call it into the meeting. And once again, thanks everybody.
John, do you know if Adam's still on? Can anybody tell if Sarah Bell? I thought he was planning on being here, so.
I don't know. He's had some technical difficulties before.
Oh, he has. Okay.
Once again, on behalf of the Northeast Coalition, thanks everyone for participating, and we hope this is just the start and that we can achieve some real progress.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. Meeting's over.